Not going to have a big timeness in your city if you have no sports teams that are national franchises.
All right. You travel a lot, and what comments do you hear from people that aren't from Kansas City when they hear where you're from?
Well, unfortunately, people on the East Coast didn't study geography, and it's something that they've got to start doing with the school districts there, because most of them have no idea what's west of the Mississippi. And so all four of us, without even talking about it, I can tell you, all of us had the experience, oh, you're the mayor of Kansas. And then I've had even people to say, well, you know, are you the mayor of Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas? And I said, sure. Just like the mayor of New York City is also the mayor of Milwaukee. You know, but I think that people who come here understand that this is a major American city. I have an uncle who came here for the first time. He thought it was going to be flat and dry, and he lives out in the Bay Area of California, and he came here and fell in love with it immediately. And so I think, as we used to say, Kansas City will take you by surprise.
Wonderful. Anything to add to that?
Well, I think that summarized it very well. It's used to be a joke many years ago, prior to any of us being in office, that somebody asked somebody about, what do you think of Kansas City? And the person said, I don't think about Kansas City. Well, I think that's changed a lot. I really do. I think that we are on the map. I think a lot of people respect what we have here, know it for many, many reasons, and a lot of visitors come here. I had a guy call me the other day, it was a classmate. He lives in Washington. He wanted to come out to Kansas City. He wanted to see three things in particular. He wanted to see the Truman Library. He wanted to see the new facility, the block facility at the Nelson Gallery, and he wanted to see the wonderful new exhibit at the Liberty Memorial. And he came out here for those three things. So I think people understand we have lots of really first-class activities and facilities.
Well, you've all done a great job changing that image and making it what it is today, from the tumbleweeds to the skyscrapers and the great things we have to offer. You travel a lot as well. Do you hear some of the same stuff?
Yes, I think what everyone else has said is so true. People, if they have come to Kansas City, I think because the expectations may be low, they're really impressed, and they should be. And again, the topography is often one of the biggest surprises, expecting it to be totally flat and being surprised by the beauty of the city, also the friendliness of the people. I hear that a lot. Everybody is so friendly and everybody is so nice and they want to help you. So I think that's something very positive. And you know, I remember a classmate of mine from KU who went to Michigan for law school, and first day he was there, they had a reception, and the spouse of one of the new law students was engaged in conversation with him, and he said to her, well, now where are you from? And she said, well, I'm from New York City, and I've never been away from New York City, and I'm so excited. And he said, well, what are you most excited about? And she said, well, now we can go to California for the weekends. So that's an illustration of what Emmanuel was saying, the lack of understanding, the lack of really knowing this country. And somebody else said from the East Coast, when he drove for the first time to school in Colorado, that it took forever to get across Nebraska. He had no idea that a state could be that large.
When you see people from outside of Kansas City, what's the one thing you brag about the most? What comes to mind right off the bat about Kansas City?
I think the combination of amenities, what Mayor Berkeley was talking about as far as all of the venues, not just the artistic venues, but also the teams, and the combination of lifestyle opportunities. And then it all boils down to the people, an environment in which almost everyone can feel comfortable and can feel part of the community and make a contribution.
Congressman Cleaver, you still get the chance to brag about us in Washington, D.C., and what do you usually tell people?
Well, I tell people that this is a major American city, and most people believe that St. Louis is larger, and it is not. I had to call, and I apologize for being obsessed with this, but I've had to call major news networks to tell them when they do the national weather that if you're doing the largest city, stop doing St. Louis. You know, it's Kansas City. And so I tell them how large it is. Washington, D.C. could probably fit inside our city limits probably 15 or 20 times. St. Louis fits inside our city limits 3 times. This is a major American city. And I tell them how huge it is, and people are surprised. You know, you can compare it with the population of Cleveland and Atlanta, Milwaukee, other cities that people believe to be large. I always like to say, ask people, tell me the largest city in Ohio, and almost automatically everybody's going to say Cleveland. The truth of the matter is, it's Columbus, and we suffer that same fate.
Absolutely. Dr. Wheeler, what are you most proud of and brag about?
Well, I brag about the arts scene pretty often. We've got the Performing Arts Center about to open next year, and we have the Nelson Gallery that's improved its situation so the last decade. Then we have the sports that the mayor mentioned. It's a well-rounded city with lots of real estate, and we all go on and on when we're asked what is good about Kansas City. So when you are asked to support a Spirit of Kansas City program, well, you can count on us. We can get this younger generation very interested in what they've got.
That's what we want to hear. That's wonderful.
Tell them to get involved, no matter what political party or what activity, whether it's an issue campaign or a person campaign. Get involved in a campaign. They'll begin to see all the different cross currents of interests and activities and support throughout the various parts of the city.
If a regular citizen isn't political in any way, but just is a big fan of all things Kansas City, what would you say to them or recommend to them into getting involved?
Well, I think a political campaign is one avenue. There are many volunteer civic organizations, whether it be in the arts or whether it be in almost any aspect of the city. But just get involved, and then you meet people, and they say, "Have you ever thought of this?" And you get involved. There is a networking that's very important, whether it's in your business career or your other interest career or your social career. Networking is very important, but you got to get started.
Mayor Barnes, what would you tell them?
Well, I agree with what Dick was saying. I think it's always helpful to match what your own personal passion is, what you're naturally interested in, with whatever volunteer or civic opportunity there might be out there. So if it's related to a disease perhaps that someone in your family has suffered from, that's certainly an avenue to get involved in that particular organization that supports research efforts on that disease, ranging over to people who are interested in a particular sport and to volunteer or get active in that way. The getting involved in political campaigns or issue-related campaigns is an excellent way to not only make a contribution, but get to know other people who share your values and your interests. So there are ample opportunities, and so often people who move here from other parts of the country or even other parts of the world will say that there are so many opportunities in Kansas City, and almost always people are really welcomed if they're new and want to get involved.
Wonderful. Congressman Cleaver, you've been very successful rallying people, recruiting them and training them and giving them advice. What do you usually say to get people involved?
Well, this is perhaps the largest small city in the United States. Large because it's a major American city, but it's small enough where people can find their way around and actually have contact with the political and corporate leaders like they could in no other major city. I grew up in a city of 112,000 people. The first mayor that I ever saw with my own eyes was Ike Davis. I was an adult. I think in Kansas City, we have the opportunity to attract small groups of people into leadership positions. and there are organizations that have been designed just for the purpose of trying to integrate new people into the leadership, like the Centurions that's sponsored by I think it's the Chamber of Commerce, and there are other programs like that. So I think people need to join up with some of these organizations and get a chance to learn the landscape. But also, I agree with the other mayors. You can get involved, particularly in an issues campaign, where it's not a candidate. It's a Hassan sales tax for this, or it's some kind of levy increase for that. And then you get involved and you meet people who are involved, and people will say, you want to find somebody who's busy, because those are the people who are going to do something. And there are a lot of busy people in Kansas City.
Absolutely. Dr. Wheeler, what would you recommend to those who want to get involved?
Well, I know this will upset you, but I'd advise them to watch your station much more closely.
Well, I appreciate that. The first of many. I appreciate that. That's a great plug for us. Now, I want to talk about some of the weaknesses that the city has. We've talked about the strengths, the people, and the arts, and all the other things that you have mentioned. But what would you say some of our weaknesses are today, if there were 2 or 3?
Okay, well, I want to emphasize the danger we face by outstate forces that want to reduce our ability to get the earnings tax support from our suburbs, because both St. Louis and Kansas City are the 2 economic engines that drive Missouri. I learned that those 4 years I was in Jefferson City in the Missouri Senate. And to have them tell us how to run our city and cut down on our economic production is not a wise strategy, and that's the sort of thing that younger people have to take statewide if we in St. Louis are going to control the action.
Congressman Cleaver?
I agree. I want to associate myself completely with the comments that Charles just made. But I would also add, as a challenge in Kansas City, is the school district. It's moving in the right direction, but it's still a major problem. But I also think that we've got to have, in this era of trying to wean ourselves from fossil fuel, a system of moving people around the city that is both economically sound and environmentally sound. I think Mayor Wheeler, way back during his term, and I just said this in a speech the other day, tried to get the city interested in and committed to the construction of some kind of a rail system. And I think it's one of our deficits because we have a finite supply of fossil fuel, and this is a huge city geographically, and we've got to be able to connect people to jobs. We've got to be able to connect people to the nodes of entertainment, because there's going to come a time, if we don't act, when it's going to hurt us economically not to be able to move people.
Wonderful. Mayor Berkeley?
Well, I certainly agree with the comments that have been made by both Charles and Emmanuel. Those are areas that need some significant focus in addition to what there's already been there. But another area, excuse me, I think in the international area, we have done a lot. Kay started an international office. We need to put more emphasis on the impact of international trade and exchange of all kinds. We're doing a good job, but I think we need to do an even more positive, because as the future goes, it's going to be more and more international. We're seeing it in communications. We're seeing it in trade now, but it's going to expand even more, and I think it's essential for a city like Kansas City to really be in the forefront.
What weaknesses would you point out?
Well, I agree about everything that's been said. The earnings tax, the international, the transportation. I think we all, having been mayor, are also aware of the challenges when you do have as large a geographic area as we have. If it seems in Kansas City that we're always talking about infrastructure, that is true. When you have the amount of land that we have, much of it undeveloped yet, and all of the challenges of sewer systems and roads and highways, the list goes on, so that we are always having to stretch ourselves to meet the multiple demands of that much geography. So when I look at Los Angeles, not Los Angeles, but San Francisco, and recognize that you can put 5 or 6 San Franciscos inside the city limits of Kansas City, Missouri, and I think to myself, if we had 1/5 the size, we would be able to have everything in tip-top shape, and it's almost impossible to do that at this point with this much geography for which the city is responsible.
What would you recommend for somebody who's trying to debate whether they're going to move to the Kansas side or stay in Kansas City, Missouri? What would you sell them on in staying within those city boundaries?
I think Kansas City, Missouri as a city has so much to offer in terms of variety of housing opportunities. You can have a farm and live within the city limits of Kansas City, Missouri. I think being a part of a community that supports all of the amenities that we have within our city limits, the sense of belonging that comes from being part of a city that is made up of so many different kinds of people, as far as everything from economic level to racial and ethnic makeups. More and more people are wanting that kind of experience, wanting to feel part of a multifaceted community. I've talked to so many young people who have said to me, well, I grew up in the suburbs, referring to different parts of the region, and now I want to be part of the action. And when they say I want to be part of the action, they're talking about Kansas City, Missouri.
Wonderful. Dr. Wheeler, what would you recommend for somebody debating whether or not to live in the city?
Well, I was thinking that if you're a Republican, you should probably move into Kansas.
All right.
We're all Harry Truman Democrats over here, you know, and
right.
Harry's our hero, and Eisenhower's a wonderful man that came from Kansas, so it works out well.
Absolutely.
And I will say that even though I'm a Democrat, Dick is my kind of Republican.
Well, and you were one of the first Republican mayors since the 1920s.
Right.
How difficult was that, was surrounded by all the Democrats?
Well, they were all very, I won't say all, but most were very helpful, and I think the nonpartisan spirit that is in Kansas City, I think works, and consequently, I'm a supporter of it. I think you have a different type of issue and problem when you're in an urban area as opposed to a national election. I'm very much for the two-party system that we have nationally and statewide, but I think in a city, what we have works very well, and I think it also should encourage people to live here. We get good results, and I'm very proud of what our city has accomplished over the years, and I encourage everybody to live here. Even if they're a Republican, they should come to Kansas City.
Even a Republican. All right. Congressman Clean, new question for you. If you were running for mayor in the next election, or if you were advising somebody who wanted to run for mayor, what stance would you take? What advice would you give to that person?
I would say, tell them that I think it would be in their political interest to look at what these guys have done. I was asked a question before my first mayoral race about which of the mayors I would like to pattern my mayoral term after, and I said there are some things that Dick Berkeley does or did that were just fabulous, and I'd like to take some of that. And Charlie Wheeler, I'd like to take some of that. And Ike Davis, I'd like to take some of that. I would say to the next, and I just said this to someone last week. I said, one of the things you may want to do is try to get us to sit down, on a monthly basis and talk with you, or every other month, because I think that you can avoid some pitfalls by talking with someone who said, "Oh, I tried to do that, and if I were you, I wouldn't go there," and it's free.
Absolutely. And that's part of this show, is talking about the history of Kansas City, and so it can repeat itself when it's a good issue, and when it's not, we can learn from that and move on. Dr. Wheeler, if you were advising someone to run for mayor today, what would you recommend?
Well, I think I would recommend that they realize that we're facing very difficult times. We're in the middle of a recession, there's a big housing crisis, and that jobs are the thing that they should concentrate on and support bipartisan efforts to get our economy back to the normal level.
Mayor Berkeley, a question for you. If you could give Kansas City a letter grade in how well it's doing right now, what would that be, and how would you improve it?
Oh, I dislike giving grades to anything. I think we're doing very well, but I think we certainly have room for improvement. I think you should always have that feeling, quite frankly. There's always got to be a better way. There's always got to be something that you're not doing, or if you don't think so, you're not looking closely enough. I think we have the right spirit, the right attitude, but there are always things that need to be done. Kay mentioned infrastructure, a serious problem in Kansas City, as in most communities, because we're reaching that point on certain facilities that it's the age, just like the sewer situation is very serious and extremely costly, and we're going to see that in our water bills over the next, and sewer bills over the next period. But we're heading in the right direction. We're doing a lot of great things, but there's more yet to be done.
Mayor Barnes, if you could pick one thing that keeps Kansas City from being the best city it could be, or is there one thing that you think we need that we lack to be a world-class city, what would that be?
I think the psychology of a community is extraordinarily important. I believe that we become who or what we believe we are. And that applies to individuals, it also applies to a community. So I know that each one of us, when we were mayor, worked really hard on a positive attitude and really doing everything we could to enable people in the community to feel good about themselves and their city. I think that has to continue in the future. I see much to feel good about in terms of groups of people out in the community